said today. I, by the way, love your channel. I love your work. Like the translation video you made about the Johannine comma and all that. I think it's really informative. But you said something earlier that caught my attention regarding Justin Martyr and how he was involved with Platonic kind of ideas and thought, right? I kind of wanted to get your thoughts if you thought that could also be part of divine revelation, or like the development as a outcome of divine revelation or progressive revelation.
Okay, so of course, in theory, the answer could be yes, right? I mean, are we going to tell God that he couldn't continue revelation if he wanted to? Right? So in theory, yes, but based on the data, we have some problems. So number one, new revelation can't contradict old revelation. You agree with that?
Yeah, I would say that.
Okay, so if Justin Martyr gives new revelation which contradicts the Bible, then we should reject him.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Okay, so does the Bible teach Platonism at all?
No, it does not teach Platonism.
Okay, so then we just settled this. Justin Martyr, as I showed in the quote, does borrow from Platonism to both understand and teach about Christ. Now, I'm not going to say Justin's like a heretic and not going to heaven. His conversion, according to what I've read, seems legit. It seems like he literally wanted to believe in Christ for his salvation. He did work on trying to refute different heresies of his day. Some of them I think he gets pretty solid on. But Justin Martyr understood Christ as the Logos in light of the intermediary principle of Middle Platonism. Okay, that's not the Logos of the Bible.
I can grant you that. The reason I bring up the Platonism and Martyr thing is because, in Acts chapter 17, verse 28, Paul is, appropriating a poet who's talking about Zeus and says it's about God the Father. When he says we are all his offspring, it's originally the poet Aratus who writes that, and it's about Zeus. And so it's like, if Paul can recognize something from God in this foreign kind of theology and philosophy, to me I wouldn't say it makes sense to just blindly affirm, like the church fathers who indulged in Greek philosophy are all speaking divine truth. Mm-hmm. But to me, I'm not convinced of disqualifying them from or to just I find it troubling to say they got it wrong because they could have gotten it right.
Okay, so here's the thing. What Paul is doing in Acts 17 is drawing from different things pagans believe to affirm something that's true. Right? That's not the same as using things pagans believe to create new doctrine. Right? Like on Christ's ontology. Those are totally two different things. So Paul can borrow certain semantics to teach people a biblical truth, but he cannot borrow from pagan ideologies to teach something that's not consistent with the Bible, right? So he can't do that in reverse. That only works one way. That works one way. So that's the problem here, right? You have Justin Martyr saying that Christ, he actually believed he was another God. Justin Martyr, a lesser God, but another God. And to some degree, you could even affirm that depending on what you mean by God. The problem is that he compared that to the fiery ousia spoken of by Plato. He says that Plato ascerned, with the wisdom from above that, the Most High God exists in a fiery ousia. And he thought that the sun existed like that as fire kindled from fire. That was a big thing set forth by Justin. So that's borrowing directly from the intermediary and Middle Platonism. And that depends upon the idea that the Most High God is too transcendent to engage with the material world. That's just not true. So, I mean, let me ask you this. Did the Father create the material world?
Well, I believe it always pre-existed, but In a way, yeah, sure. According to Genesis, at least.
Yeah, so I want to be clear. So do you agree that the Father, even in Trinitarianism, that person, he created the physical world? Even if it's with the Son and Holy Spirit, did he create it?
Yeah, my bad, guys. I definitely fumbled in this portion of the video. I didn't want to reveal where I'm getting my theology from. For Metaphysics, Mike doesn't know, I submit to the Vedas. And so these categories of ex materia, ex nihilo, not something I was focused on. Yeah.
I'm unsure. I don't think so. Because I'll get to this. I'll get to why. You mentioned, first off, it seems you don't really trust the church fathers on their theology or philosophy, right? What I was gonna ask before you asked me if the Father created all material things, I was gonna ask, like, why should we trust their authority on the canon itself either? The reason I'm unsure whether this idea Jesus is God really comes from the origin or not, but I think it does, is because of the apocryphal sayings of Thomas, right, which was condemned by the church fathers, and they never referred to it. They were referring to other things like Epistle of Barnabas and Shepherd of Hermas. But in this 114 sayings of Thomas, not the infancy gospel of Thomas, the 114 sayings, that even though it was not canonical to Nicene, to those church fathers, from what I can tell, it also does have a high Christology in saying number 76, painting Jesus as the source of all things. So I'd still have to say I'm unsure because of the church fathers themselves. I don't trust them. So why should I trust them when they say this book is not canonical? And then lo and behold, that uncanonical text also has a high Christology before the Nicene development. So that's why I'm unsure. I'm curious what your take is on that.
Okay, so listen, there's some red flags going off regarding what you exactly mean. It sounds very similar to some Gnostic ideas.
So imagine this. I am a Hindu. You are a Trinitarian. This is Metaphysics Mike. You go to Mike with some council literature from the first few centuries that supports this idea that Jesus was divine. Mike will look at you and say that that is Middle Platonic pagan philosophy. Fine. I myself, with no dogmatic commitments regarding Christianity, go to him with some apocryphal texts like the sayings of Thomas number 76, where Jesus says, I am the light of all lights, or 77. Something along those lines, not accepted by the council he rejects. And Mike turns to me and says, no, that is Gnostic philosophy. So the question really here, ladies and gentlemen, is to decipher what is it that Metaphysics Mike's philosophy is with respect to the revelation as, professed by Christians regarding the New Testament. And we can pinpoint that Metaphysics Mike believes in the Pharisaic conception of the Messiah. And I think that'll come to disprove the Unitarian position quite fast. You see, ladies and gentlemen, Jesus does not correct the Pharisees on only or simply the identity of the Messiah, but he also corrects the Pharisees on the nature of the Messiah. Well, to highlight this point, we can look at Matthew chapter 22, verses 41 to 46. Jesus approaches a group of Pharisees and asks them, what do you think about the Messiah? Whose son is he? And the Pharisees respond, the son of David. Now Jesus goes on to quote Psalm 110, where David writes, the Lord said to my Lord, come sit at my right hand, and I will make your enemies a footstool. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the Pharisees already had Psalm 110:1. They already had this conception that the Messiah is going to be a descendant of David and he gets authority from God. This wasn't a missing piece of information. They were aware of this. However, Jesus then presses them and asks them, if this figure is simply the son of David, why is it that David calls him Lord? Now, the passage ends with the Pharisees not being able to respond to Jesus, but I think to get to the bottom of this, we simply have to ask, who is the Lord of David from the Old Testament? Now, if you're not convinced and you believe that this is still, Jesus trying to fulfill or trying to convey a Unitarian message of the Messiah, you would simply have to point to verses like Daniel 7:13. I saw in the night visions, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. The Hebrew is kabad enash, like a human being. Not bar enash, which means humanity, but like a human being, like riding the clouds of heaven, coming and presenting yourself before the Ancient of Days. So, this idea that Jesus is simply a human Messiah, it's no different from what the Pharisees expected from the Son of David. But Jesus had to correct them even further when asking him, why is it that the Son of David is being called Lord by David? And so, I don't quite think this Unitarian position is easily defensible if we even refer to the most textually critical explanations of work, like let's say Dan McClellan and his work on the Gospel of John, where he correctly highlights there is no definitive article with the theos. So it really is saying it's an anarthrous theos, meaning the verse is really saying, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was divine. That's what it's saying. It's not saying the Word was God, capital G. It's saying the Word was divine. And none of that contradicts or even has an issue with the explanation Jesus is rhetorically giving the Pharisees on the identity of the HaMashiach, you could say. So this was my take on the whole Trinitarian, Unitarian kind of dispute. It really seems kind of artificial constraints being set up on the kind of philosophies you can use to interpolate a set of revelation. But that's my take on it. Thank you guys for watching, and see you guys soon. Jai Shri Ram.
You should trust or not trust the church fathers any more than me. Every single one of us has to study to show ourselves approved. We have to do our best to read, to study, and to pray, to genuinely seek God and pray for wisdom, to ask for it, right?